In this video, I want to show you how to refactor React code to something better. And here I prepared for you a junior example of the code, which is quite big, and we want to refactor it to something similar to senior level. And this is how our project looks like. We have here a list of the issues, which is essentially a table. Some issues are grayed out, we can't click and choose them. They are in the status red, which means resolved, and some statuses are green, and then we can select these items. And here on the top it is highlighted that we successfully selected one item. We can select more, and after we select all of them, we're getting here checkbox and selected for. We can also deselect all or select all. This is exactly the feature that was done previously and that we want to refactor. Let's look now on the code. Here inside app I have a bed table, which is just a single component which implements all this stuff, and inside we are passing an array of our issues. So what is issues? As you can see here inside JSON, this is an array of objects, typically for example from the backend, with ID, name, message, status, and some information like number of events and number of users. So essentially we are passing these issues to our bed table, and then all magic is happening inside. So what do we have inside bed table? And just imagine that you got this code from another person, now you are inside company and you must support this code or maybe refactor to something better. So let's assume that we see this code for the first time. Here we have our function bed table, and we're getting here issues as a props. This is totally fine. As you can see, this is just a single component, it is not splitted at all. Secondly, a lot of people, when they look on the code, it looks fine for them, because they see essentially, okay, here is some use state, one more use state, here is some handler, we're doing some logic inside, one more handler and one more handler, and then on the bottom I have some markup. And here we have some input, and then here markup for our issues. This looks fine, we can leave it like this. But this is a bad attitude, because essentially we didn't dig inside this code at all, we don't really understand this code, and we didn't try to improve it. Realistically, it is always much easier to write code from scratch than refactor. This is why essentially if you know that code is bad, and you just need to implement feature like this, it might be easier to recreate this component completely without trying to refactor things. But here we don't want to do that, obviously it is easier, we want to refactor and look inside existing code. This is why what I want to do, I want to copy paste the whole file, and I created here a good table. This is where I want to paste everything without any changes. And now inside app we want to use not bad table but good table, so we can see that everything is working just like before. So let's do this now. We have our good table, and the first thing that I don't like, we have here a function keyword. I really like to create my components as an arrow function. And the structuring issues is totally fine inside our props. The most important part of any component or any project at all is the state with your data. If you planned and architectured your state in a wrong way, then it won't be easy to work with it inside your components. Because essentially your state and how you are changing, this is exactly the core of your project, and on top of it you build your business logic. If it is done in a bad way, you can't really support it. So let's have a look what we have here. We have here first of all a use state with checked state. And what we're saving inside, we're just creating a new array, and for every single issue we're created checked as false, and here we're creating background. First of all, I don't really like to store color inside an array. Checked false is understandable because all our issues are unchecked by default, and then we're changing this property. Additionally, here we have some interesting states like select, deselect, all is checked, which is not really clear, and number checkbox is selected, which essentially means we're updating this property every single time when we're selecting the element. I'm sorry for interruption, but I just want to let you know that I have lots of advanced courses on different web technologies where we create real applications and prepare for the interviews. You can find the link in the description box below. Now let's jump back into the video. What I see here as a base of our state that we need is first of all an array of issues. We already are getting that, we don't need to touch this at all. But secondly, we need somehow to store for every single issue checked property. This is exactly what I want to do. And we might store that in different ways. But as a flexible approach, I highly recommend you to think about it as a small database inside our component, which essentially means we're getting here an array of our issues, and every single issue has an ID, which actually means I want to build an object which will look like this. We have here an ID of our issue, like maybe 1 to 3, and as a value we have an object with different fields. For example, we can have here is selected, and it will be by default false. The main idea with such approach, we can always access the specific issue by ID inside our object without need to use find, for example, if we would do that with array. Additionally, such approach allows you to store lots of different properties inside. And essentially this object is just a view state of our component, because all these properties are only related to the view, like for example is selected. It is not related to the data. This is why here what I want to do, I want to create an object with all our issues. This is why I want to call it issue entries, because this is an object, and here will be set issue entries. And here we will call useStateHook. But what I want to do here, I want to write a function, because I want here to return my calculations, and I don't need it every single time when our component is re-rendered. This is why we're packing here inside function, so we will avoid recalculating it every single time. So basically here we can write object dot from entries, and inside we want to pass our entries from which we want to create an object. So essentially what we want to do, we want to create first an array of key pairs, so we can use here from entries. So if we are providing inside an array and we have here a key pair, which means also an array, and here we have some ID, which is our key, then here as a value we can store, for example, is selected false. As you can see here from such construction, we are creating an object exactly like we wanted. This is why here I want to write const entries, because I want to create our key pairs, and we can loop through our issues. We are getting access to every single issue, and we want to write here issue ID as our key, and as a value it will be an object with is selected property, which will be by default false. And now here we can write entries to create our object. And after this I want just to console log our issue entries so you can see how it looks like. As you can see in browser now, we are getting every single issue with our ID as a key, and as a value we are getting is selected false. This is already enough for us to start working. So here let's jump to the bottom and let's look what we are rendering. So here we have some table, then the head, we don't look at that for now. And after this, inside the body we are getting issues, and here we have a map. This is actually fine because we want to map through every single issue, but what I really don't like is this destructuring, because we are getting lots of properties which are not being associated with our issue. What I want to write here instead is just a word issue. Now let's look first on our markup. We're returning here inside our map a tr for every single issue. And here we're writing class name stylesTr. I don't really like the name here, stylesTr. I would prefer here to write row class. Why that? Because essentially here we're storing the class for our row. As you can see here, we're reading the class openIssue from our classes. And here our boolean is issue is open. I don't really like this either. The better name will be is opened issue, because this is a boolean. And here we're checking our issue.status equals open. Now here we must update our code. It is opened issue. And here also is opened issue. And here then it's not stylesTr, but we're using here our row class. As you can see here inside style, we're using checked state index. And what is checked state? Just to remind you here on the top, this is the previous useStateHook, where for every single issue we created a field with checked and background. So realistically, we simply want to apply different color inside style based if we're selected or not. So we can write here that we want a background color, and we're checking here that our issue entries, just to remind you, this is our object, and here we're writing issue.id. This is exactly how we're accessing the value that we need without need to find an element inside an array, and here will be is selected. So if it is selected, then we want to apply this color. In other case, we want to apply white color. And now instead of this code, we can simply write style background color. So again, this is our object with this selected property, and we just apply different color. Additionally, what I see here, we're using let for some reason. We don't really need that. This is why everything will be const. Let's look on our next line. We're using here key index, which is really bad because we have a unique ID inside every single issue, and it makes a lot of sense to use here issue.id. And now here we have on-click event on our TR, which makes total sense for me because we want to maintain a click on the full row and not on a specific cell. Now let's look on our TD. As you can see here, we have two cases. Either our issue is open and then we're rendering this part, or we're rendering this part when our input is disabled. The main point is that realistically we don't need two different inputs. We can just change properties inside single one of them. So let's leave this one. First of all, input class name checkbox. This is totally fine. Type with an object is not really needed. It can be just type checkbox. Additionally, we want to make it disabled when our issue is not opened. This is why here we can write this logic is opened issue. We already have this property. As you can see here on the top, class name is the same type we wrote, ID we don't really need at all, name we don't really need, value also, and even checked I won't write for now. And I don't really want here on change event because we maintain a click on our row, on the whole row, and not on the specific TD. This is why it makes a lot of sense to me to remove all this code completely and simply leave a simple input inside a TD. After this, we're rendering the name, and it is coming from our issue.name, also issue.message. And here we have our isOpenedIssue to render a span. But again here, as you can see, the difference in these two spans is just in the class name. It is either green circle or red circle. This is why we can do exactly the same like we did with row class, for example, and create here status class. And here we can check if the issue is opened. Then here we can write classes.greenCircle. In other case, it is classes.redCircle. And now here on the bottom, instead of all this code, we can simply write inside our class name, status class, and then we can remove all this logic completely and just leave it with status class. Let's have a look in browser. As you can see here, we're getting an error. The style prop expects a mapping from style properties to value and not a string. And this error is coming from here because I must put a background inside as an object, which actually means in style we're providing an object with property background color. Now when I reload the page, we don't have any errors and everything is being rendered just like before. So we refactored the rendering of our component. Now let's look on the click event on our rows. And as you can see here, we have on click event and here on click. Let's have a look what is on click here on the top. If we have an opened issue, then we're calling here handle on change. In other case, we don't call anything. I don't really like this code because it doesn't make any sense to click on the disabled row at all. What we can do here, we can simply disable it with CSS, and then we can't really use here checkboxes or click on this row at all. And as you can see here on our row class, we have a class resolved issue when it is completed, which actually means we can jump inside our CSS, table module.css, and here we can find our resolved issue. And as you can see, the code here is cursor not allowed. We can just write here pointer events none, and it will disable completely all events at all. As you can see now, after reload, I can't really click this checkbox at all, which means this whole row is being disabled. This is why instead of this on click, we can simply call here something like select row, and we're providing inside issue ID that we want to select. Obviously, this select row does not exist, but first of all, I want to remove this on click, and secondly, I want to find this handle on change and rename it to select row. And as you can see here, we're getting position inside. We don't want this. We want an issue ID because it makes a lot of sense. We want to operate not with indexes and positions, but just with the IDs of our entities. And obviously, it must be camel case string. Now here, let's look what is happening inside. We're getting here an updated state for checked state. We don't have that anymore. And after this, we're calculating total selected. And as you can see, additionally, we're getting here two functions, set num checkboxes selected and handle interdetermination. Realistically, I want to comment out all this code because we can do it much simpler. What we really are doing when we're selecting a row, we simply change property is selected inside our state. This is what we want to update. which actually means here we can write updated issue entry, and this is a single entity that we want to update inside. This is why here I want to spread our issue entries, here issue ID. This is exactly the specific entry that we want to find, and here we want to update is selected, and we want to toggle it, not just change to the true. This is why here I will write not issue entries. Here we want to find by our issue ID our element dot is selected, which actually means we simply inverse this value. And this is our updated object. Now we must update the whole state. This is why here let's do a property updated issue entries. And again, entries means the whole object. Here we're spreading all our issue entries, and we're overriding just a single property by our issue ID. And our value will be this updated issue entry that we prepared. And after this, we can simply call set issue entries and provide inside an updated value, and it is updated issue entries, which actually means what we're doing here. First of all, we're updating the value of this issue ID, then we're updating the whole object with our issue entries, and then we're calling our setter. Now let's click on a single row. This is our object. Every single property is set to false, and just one element is set to true. As you can see here, it is working because we're getting here a background for the selected element, but this checkbox is not there. We must fix that. This is why let's go here on the bottom and find this checkbox. And here what we want to do is apply checked state. And what is our checked state? This is our is selected. So here we can write issue entries. This is our object. Here we have an issue ID, and we just want to call here is selected to check that it is checked. I'm reloading the page here, and when I'm clicking on the row, as you can see, we're getting here a checkbox and our row is being selected. I'm clicking again and it is deselected again. But here is a small warning that we're getting. As you can see here, you provided a checked prop to the form field without a non-change handler, which actually means it is a read-only field. And actually this is totally correct. This is why here I want to write read-only property, because realistically we don't want to change by hands this checkbox. We are simply clicking on our row and this checkbox is being updated. So again, just to remind you here how much code we had here previously inside this function and how much code we're writing here now. This is only because we're getting the correct state and we're writing our business logic efficiently. The next step here is to look on our total selected. As you can see here, we got lots of code and lots of calculation which map and reduce inside this function after selecting a row. This is completely wrong because we're in React world and we're not writing here plain JavaScript with DOM. We want to write properties that will be changed when our state changes, which actually means here on the top, after our issue entries, we can create a new property, total selected. And what is our total selected? This is the total of our selected elements, which actually means we can take here object values of our issue entries. This is our object. Now this is an array, and we can use filter and get access to every single issue data. And we can test here that our issue data must be set to is selected. And after this, we can simply apply length. And what this code does, it returns for us the amount of items that are selected for us. Now let's jump back to the bottom and look on our markup. First of all, as you can see here inside our issues map, index is unused. We can safely remove that. And now I want to look on our top part of the table. As you can see here, we have inside our table an input, which is a checkbox. And then on the right, we have this text regarding selected. So here we're getting number checkboxes selected, then selected and the number. In other case, none selected, which essentially means we can use here total selected, and here will be also total selected that we just created. And all other code is kind of fine. We can move this to the variable if we want, but I don't really see a lot of sense in it. Let's reload the page. As you can see here, none selected. I'm selecting one row and we're getting selected one. I'm selecting another row and we're getting selected two, which actually means you don't need to apply any logic inside your handle change like it was here previously. You don't really need to calculate total selected every single time here. This property will be automatically calculated if you are basing it on your state. So all this code can be removed now. Let's look on our header again. As you can see before this text, we had a checkbox. This is an input with some class name. This is fine. Type should not be written inside an object. We have here an ID, name, and value. This is all not needed at all. And here we have checked, which is realistically just total selected. And here again we have on change event when we're toggling all our issues. And the name here is handle select deselect all, which is kind of bad. Let's just name it select all. And now we must rename our function handle select deselect all. We just want here select all. And what our select all method does, it simply sets the whole object, all our entries, to either is selected true or is selected false. But the main point is we're doing kind of part of it inside our initial state, because here we're setting all our items to false, which actually means we can even create here a helper for that. So what I want to create here is something like convert issues to entries. And here I'm providing inside is selected property, because essentially at the beginning it will be always false, and now when we're toggling it, it makes a lot of sense to recreate it fully. And what I want to do here, I want just to move this code inside. So we're creating these issues, and inside we're getting is selected with is selected property. Now here we can simply call this convert issues to entries function and provide inside false, because by default all of them are falsy. But what this function allows us now to do is to use it inside this function select all. So essentially we don't need all this code with for each and then fill and then total selected and whatever else. And we can simply write here that we want to get updated issue entries. And we're calling here our convert issues to entries function. And here inside we must provide our event.target.checked. And after this we can simply call our set issue entries, and we're updating the whole object. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page, no errors. I'm clicking here selected 6. Let's have a look. Everything is selected. But here is the huge problem. As you can see here, even disabled rows were selected. I'm deselecting now, and all rows, even disabled ones, are also deselected. We don't want that. This is why we must update our logic a little bit. So essentially here the main problem is on the top that we're creating our object for all our issues. But realistically we're interested only in the issues which are still not resolved. This is why here let's set is selected and check that issue.status equals open. And when it is open, then we're setting is selected property. In other case, we're setting false, which actually means all our issues which are resolved are by default false, and we never update them to true. Let's check again. I'm checking here all our items, here selected 4, not 6, and now our resolved items are not selected, only our items that can be selected by hands. I'm clicking here again, and these items are deselected. And the last feature here that we need to refactor is called interdetermination. As you can see here, there is a function handle interdeterminate checkbox, and what it does inside, it assigns interdeterminate in true or false inside our checkbox. And if you don't know what is this, here this checkbox can be partially selected. But the main problem is that this property is not supported by default inside React, so we can't really use it here inside our input. We can use here, for example, checked, but we can't write here interdeterminate. It simply does not exist, which actually means we must handle it on our own. And actually here it is done in kind of ugly way with getElementById. This is not a React way at all. What we need to do here, we want to create here a reference. This is why here let's create a reference for our select all checkbox. This is why it's a reference, and we're calling here a useRef function without a default value. Now here for our checkbox, we can set ref, and it will be our select all reference. What we want to do now, every single time when we're changing the amount of items that were selected, we want to set this interdeterminate property, which actually means we're using here useEffect for this. And here, first of all, I want to know how many opened issues we have. And we can't use here our total. We must filter them with open status. This is why here total opened issues. And here we can filter our issues and get access to every single issue and check its status. So its status must be open. And we're checking here length. So now we know how many total opened we have. And we can simply calculate here a property indeterminate, because our total selected must be smaller than total opened issues, and our total selected must be bigger than 0, which actually means we're setting this property to true only when we selected something but did not select everything. And after this, we can update this DOM element, so select all ref, current, and here will be indeterminate, and we're assigning inside our property indeterminate that we just created. Now here what we need to do is provide all our dependencies, and as you can see here we're getting a warning that we used issues and total selected inside, but they are not our dependencies. This is why here our issues and total selected, and now our use effect is totally correct. As you can see here, we don't need to do anything with the input, it is just a reference and this is enough. Let's have a look. I'm reloading the page and select just a single entry. As you can see now we're getting this symbol, which means that we selected something but not fully. I'm selecting again and again. This symbol is still there, but only when I'm selecting everything, we're getting here the checkbox that everything is selected. I'm deselecting here one item, and now again we're getting this symbol. But still, select all and deselect all is working just fine. So we refactored everything, now let's clean it out. Here on the top, we don't need this checked state, this is an old one. Also select deselect is not needed, and this state also. Select row is just fine, and here this commented out code is not needed, and the whole function is not needed also, I will just remove it. So let's have a look what we have. First of all, we have here an additional helper, and then a state for our issue entries, and total selected property which is being calculated based on this state. We have here a reference, because we need to work with the DOM, and we have here just a single select row function which updates our state. Again, select all simply updates our state, and the use effect is needed for this indeterminate property. And now after this here we have quite clean markup that is easy to read and support. So this is how you typically need to refactor your code inside React. And if you want to improve it even more, it makes a lot of sense to learn how to write tests inside React, which I covered in this video.